Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. And I'm not making this up. I've been super excited about being a chance to moderate this panel since Mr. Peterson asked me, and literally just spoke with a gentleman in the room. He said, Chris, this is the panel. If when we get higher ed right, this could potentially have the biggest impact on our state's future more than anything else that we've talked about. So didn't even pay him, but I think this is a very, very important discussion. Before we get to it, first, can we all give a big round of applause to Mr. Andy Peterson of the Chamber? I love this event. I think it's so much fun, so thank you for putting this together. All right, let's get to this. With us today, four outstanding gentlemen. They're going to talk about higher ed. NDSU Chancellor Dr. Mark Hagerott. Thank you for being here, sir. Representative Rick Becker literally just got out of surgery. I was hoping he was going to have his scrubbies on, but he put on his suit for us, so thank you for joining us, sir. Senator Tim Flackel, he's also the provost of the Tri-College University, is here, so thank you for being here. And then Nick Hacker, he's a member of the State Board of Higher Ed. So I want to start here, gentlemen, and again, just to remind you, if you've got questions out there, please text them in. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. But everybody I talk to, gentlemen, there's so many sort of disparate visions of, hey, this is what higher ed should be doing. This is how it should be serving in our state. So I want to start with each one of you, given, if you wouldn't mind, maybe a 60 to 90 second vision of, hey, Chris, if I had a magic wand, here's where I think higher ed should be, what we should be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. And Nick, we'll start with you, sir.
Sure, thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate the question. First and foremost, what we need to be focused on is student success. That's what we're here to do. Every day, day in and day out, wherever those students land, is to ensure that they are successful. Number two is to educate our citizenship to know how to think, not just what to think. And number three is to serve industry and business needs, to fill jobs. We've got a lot of open vacant jobs, 15,000, 5,000 to 6,000 in the Valley, and we need to fill jobs. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a quick question actually of the audience. Please. It's the afternoon. Would you all mind standing up? Because we've been sitting all day. I'm going to ask just, it'll be two simple questions. The first question is, if you have no job openings in your company, department, agency, 0 job openings, I want you to sit down. For everybody left standing, if you have any job openings that require less than a bachelor's degree, you can stay standing, everybody else sit down. So if all your job openings require a bachelor's degree, if not, you should be standing. That's probably half of our crowd. So one of the things I hope we can spend some time on today is how we fulfill industry need without a bachelor's degree.
One thing, if you don't mind, sir, before I go on to Senator Flackel, is that, to me, student success can be a very nebulous idea. So how would you define that?
Chris, one of the things that we run into when it comes to student success is graduation. We're working diligently. The board is laser focused along with the institutions on graduation rates under 6 years, under 5 years. How about in 4? We can see institutions making major progress. The University of North Dakota just reduced the number of credit hours it requires to obtain your bachelor's degree from 125 to 120. They also took anybody with a double major, and they're allowing those underlying courses to overlap, to count towards that double major, so we're getting them through, giving them the knowledge they need. Student success is graduating and finding a job. It's job placement. And we can point to, I can give you numbers all day. We can go to BSC. Their job placement is over 90%, 98% in fact. So when they graduate, they get jobs. So it comes to graduation and retention. And how do we improve on both of those metrics? We have seen minor increases, but we're definitely not to the level we need to be at.
And just for clarity, when you say retention, you mean retention meaning they stay in the state of North Dakota, correct?
2 things. 1, keeping them from dropping out. Right?
Okay.
Number 2, retaining them in the state of North Dakota, pairing them up with employers, with industry.
All right, that was a little bit longer than our 90 seconds, but we'll do our best. Senator Flackel, your vision, sir.
Well, I think there's a couple of things we really need to laser in on, and we have one of the best systems in the United States. I go to many other states. However, there's ample room where we still need to really continue to drive forward to improve on it. We cannot become complacent in any means. Some people think that it's bad when the House has a difference with the Senate, or the legislature has a difference with the system office, or the governor's office. That's great to me. I think that is a healthy atmosphere where all ideas are brought forward. I take a great deal of thought when people that I've worked with, I mean, you pick Representative Kelch is here, Nathy was here, and I want to also point out that Nathy got an 87.7, one of the top scores, which is better actually than he got ever in school, I'm told. But, to my Senate colleagues, Senator Scheibele, Cook, Devers been here, but it really does matter that you weigh in, and differences aren't always bad, but we really do need better data. And to your question, Chris, and to a question earlier, to me, we need to stop measuring so many things. Right now, the campuses and the system office have to measure about 60 different things that are important. I can only do air quotes one-handed today, apparently, I guess. So when everything matters, nothing matters. When you look at genetics, when you add additional traits that aren't, analogous, every time you add another trait, you can't make as much progress. We need to narrow it down. Maybe it's 10, I don't know. But we have to stop measuring 60 things and saying they're all important.
So if you had to pick 3, what would be the 3 metrics you would focus on?
Well, I think the fundamental one that covers a lot of them for me, that I pushed for a couple years, is number of degrees awarded per $100,000 of investment. Because that takes in so many different things. It takes in time to completion, it takes in cost of the program, it takes in a lot of other things that we have deemed as important, and you could throw away 27 other things probably right off of that. And certainly we want as many students to stay in the state as possible.
But I think, don't mean to interrupt you, sir, but we got a bunch of business owners here and people that work in business. So we all know, and he just did a great job of showing the needs that are in our state. But if we have, and no offense if you study humanities, I studied psychology, so I'll use this as an example. But if we get, 50,000 graduates with psychology degrees, that doesn't really fill their needs. And so can we really count that as a measure of success?
Well, and that's where we have started, and it's really recent when you think about it. After the 2009 session, when we passed Senate Bill 1400, we put in there that there's career advisors starting in the 7th grade so that students start thinking about, what do I want to be? Giving them realistic expectations. What's the job market out there? Like, how many years of college do I need? Is a bachelor's, an associate, a master's, a PhD? How much skin am I going to put into this game before I can do what I might love to do? But by doing that early in life, we can really help them get them into the program right away. When you compare the data in since 2009 to now, as far as the number of majors changed in the state versus out of state, we're dramatically doing better. We've decreased the number of changes, and those all cost money. Going back again to my holy grail type thing of $100,000, so that's a vital importance, I think, is give them realistic expectations, and at some point. And if anybody, most people have kids, if they want to be a whatever,
but let me
it's not
frame
our
it this
job
way.
to tell them.
And I want to move on to Representative Becker. But so you're saying, hey, Chris, we're going to measure it based off $100,000 per number of degrees that come out of our system. But again, if I do $100,000 and it's all for psychology degrees, is that really a good return on investment?
Well, I think Judy Lee would argue that we need a lot of counseling in Western North Dakota for a lot of other things. So,
and I'm just using that because I studied psychology. Okay. I don't want to demean any other degrees.
No, some of that will sort itself out. The market sorts itself out on a lot of those. But again, we have to make those available to us. One of the things that I thought was really important, I got from the university system this week, that most people don't think about. In the last 4 years, how many programs have been dropped and how many have been added? In the last 4 years, 60 programs have went on the inactive status. 75 programs have been dropped, and 54 have been added. A lot of times people think, because they hear about the ads. The ads are sexier. But the ones that say, hey, we're not doing this anymore, it's not good for us, it's not what the people employ, and nowhere in the history of North Dakota have we had better alignment with the business sector and the campuses.
Representative Becker.
Well, I think, if I remember your question, it was what areas would we want to see
I apologize. My question is for me, and if people out there disagree, please put in questions in. But when I talk to people across our state, there's a lot of disparate ideas about, hey, this is what higher ed should be, or this should be this, or this should be that. If you had a magic wand, 5 or 10 years from now, higher ed is doing what for the state of North Dakota and our students?
So I'm going to twist the question slightly and say if I had a magic wand, I would change 3 things about how we interpret or perceive higher ed and the purpose of higher ed. Number 1 is having an appreciation for the fact that with very few exceptions, nearly every single student that goes through the higher ed system costs the taxpayers money. We keep thinking about terms of only one side of the balance sheet. Every student that comes through costs the taxpayers money. The second thing is this wave of technological change that's going to be coming regardless of what we want to happen, and it's going to affect things that very likely the traditional student census is going to drop dramatically. It's going to change everything in higher ed, and it's probably going to necessitate closure of some of the campuses. The third thing is the aspect of the idea that higher ed is an economic development program. It's not true. It's not what higher ed is supposed to be about. And if we are going to pervert the intention of higher ed, economic development, the outcome analysis, if you will, of any economic development that derives from higher ed and the amount of dollars put into higher ed, it's a very poor result. And so if we're trying to get economic development out of it, we're doing a crappy job. We should be focused on one thing and one thing only. That's quality education for North Dakota students.
And again, how would you define that?
Well, this is a very good point. One of the ways that we're looking at all this, how do we define success? How do we get the students to do this? How do we get the students to do that? Higher ed is supposed to be just a service that's available rather than the centralized idea of trying to get people to do things that we in government want them to do so that it benefits them. If we allow industry to come to the table and say, hey, we're really in short supply of this, we think there's going to be a great need, that's one thing. But if we allow the students to be able to come in and say, I'm looking for such and such, instead of trying to drive them to a 4-year degree in sociology and psychology and then having them go out and be a barista with a huge debt load, that's not helping them. If we allow them, where do you want to be? Here's the services we have. It's up to you to determine whether the cost of education is going to be worthwhile for the job that you're going to get in the future and the revenue that you're going to get from that job to repay this investment.
You and I both know there's a very finite amount of 18-year-old men and women that know what they want to do for a career. So you're asking me to walk on campus and go, okay, I'm here now and I'm going to be here in 4 to 6 years. There's very few people that know that.
Well, there are a lot of people that know general guidelines. One of the things is that we're for the last couple of decades, we are pushing students 4-year degree, 4-year degree, 4-year degree. And that's why you've got a 22% drop rate in freshman year. Because they don't know, but they just know, oh, I'm supposed to go to college. Well, how about if you think a little bit more about what your goals are in the future, and it's not just to go to college and get a degree. It's what is your actual goal, and that goes back then into K-12 and having the students think about what it is that they want. But what Nick was probably alluding to is this idea that everyone just gets jammed into this 4-year concept. We have to have it. Well, there are a ton of jobs out there that don't require a 4-year degree. And again, some of this has to do with education in K-12, but as far as the job of higher ed, it's simply to provide the services that are requested or needed by the student population.
Thank you. Dr. Hager, I'm going to give you just a moment. Mr. Peterson, is there like an iPad or something like that where I can look at all the questions that are coming in? Because I know I'm missing some and I want to be able to... Is that our only way to get them? Okay, I'll try to do my best then to get to those. I apologize. Dr. Hager, your vision for higher ed, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Coming last, though, I think they've hit on most of the important points, but I'd just say we're at a period of rapid change, as you heard several speakers, so how I would judge higher ed is that we adapted in 4 vectors. One, building on Nick Hacker, is the student. The students are changing. They are not the same students we were. The technology is changing, their behavioral health needs are changing, that we're adapting to them, and that means the faculty has to adapt. The faculty cannot stay the same. So that's one vector. The second one is workforce. Hugely, hugely important, and I'll disagree with my neighbor here a little bit that, the A&M colleges were about workforce, agriculture, mechanics, new knowledge was coming in, so we have to adapt to the business people here, and we have a whole effort with business we're working on right now. We can come back to that later. The third vector is new knowledge. Research universities have absolutely changed our country. There's entire new cities. Silicon Valley used to be the size of Fargo when they decided to start making chips there, and look at Silicon Valley now. And there's a possibility our universities can transform new knowledge and technology and make us a hub for some new things. And the last one is costs, and Senator Flacco brought that up, is that, the middle-class family incomes have not gone up once you adjust for inflation since about 1979. And I live in Mandan, and there's neighbors who are really under pressure. And so we have to be mindful of costs. And, of course, the legislature was pretty generous to us in these tough conditions, but that's a fourth vector of adapting to change. So if we've successfully adapted in those four vectors over the next 10 years, I'd feel pretty good about what we've done.
How would you be more mindful of the costs?
Well, as a couple of our legislators have pointed out, they've entrusted us now to raise tuition because we don't want to be the low-cost provider. We don't want to be, just the cheap, known as the cheap producer, which I know Representative Becker has brought out. So they've allowed us to raise tuition about 4%. That right now we are generally in the northern Midwest, the lower end of tuition costs. And so I'd say that's one good metric that we're there. I would be basically looking at holding that within inflation, and in certain areas allow it to go up, which again our legislature allowed us to do. We had the least expensive law school in the nation. We don't need to be there. So program specific, identify where the market is, but in general, still try to keep within the rate of inflation from where we are.
With that being said, and Mr. Hagerott, you and I have had this conversation before, and I'm going to go into some numbers now. I wish we had a graphic, so I apologize, but I'll do my best to do this slowly. So in the last decade, we've seen an average increase of 16.8% from the state funding higher ed. So that's how much revenue they've put in, and yet enrollment increase has been about 1.7%. So when I ask you about controlling costs, is there an opportunity to cut administrator jobs, things of that nature?
That was actually one of the priorities of the legislature in 2015, asked us to look at administrative costs, and we were putting together a team to drive that, and the state budget kind of drove that. And so it became a driver that all the presidents had to adapt over, I don't have my CFO here in the audience, but over 400 positions were eliminated, both faculty and staff, and that's continuing to go on. And so it's happening, partly driven by the budget realities.
And is it the right amount, do you think, that's being cut, or should it be more or less?
Well, we have, and so real progress is being made. Real jobs are being lost. Unfortunately, we're losing some good people, too. They're poaching on people that we want to stay here. But the state board, led in part by Member Hacker, has a task force on continued efficiencies. So we're not letting up. We actually are putting a group together of college presidents, administrators, business people. Chair Morton is on there. I think he may be meeting with the governor right now. He's a business person to drive cost efficiencies even more.
Okay, thank you. Get to some of your questions. One of them, I think, says, how do you ensure the universities are having our graduates have actual job skills that industries need? And you talk about things moving so quickly today. How do we do a better job of sort of reverse engineering degrees to meet the demands of our businesses? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, I think going back to what I mentioned earlier about, I think a lot of the particular two-year campuses have their like business boards, we'll call them, that really are there, meet regularly, talking about how their industry is, dynamically changing, sometimes from every 6 months, and to try to keep in tune with that. We also need to make sure that we continue to have programs like Wilson's had for so long to say, we have people out there working, they need to brush up on these 3 skills, have a program so that they can do that, so we can continue to keep them employed at a high level and high performance level. But that's really important, is constant contact with those people in the community. I mean, that's one of the reasons why in NDSU, the College of Business is downtown, kind of the hub of economic activity in many respects, so that they see, and I see Dean Gorder was here earlier, and the North Dakota Trade Office is in that same building, so that they can't help but not be, involved with those folks.
Anybody else want to address it? Nick?
Chris, I think there's a couple of pieces to that. Is one, there are structural things in place. different committees or groups. The governor has a task force, a workforce development task force. It has all sorts of these organized groups involved, trying to convey this message of what does industry need, what are we getting from higher education. But I'm going to be brutally honest. That's a really old and archaic way of trying to address your problem. The way to address the problem is go knock on the door of the two-year school president and say, hey, you're giving us this, that's not what we need. And I'll give a good example. Hess Corporation just went back and knocked on WSC's door and said, we've got your 8-week program. It was working really great for 2 years, but we need something different. Wilson State College responded within weeks and said, we've got it. We can retool and answer the needs that you have. And this is where it really comes back to that industry partnership with higher education. There are hundreds of collaborations that occur today, all the way from State School of Science and Caterpillar and all over the place. So then what your needs are, the best way to get them met, go right to the source of where the students are being educated versus trying to work through trade associations.
And I don't know if this is a Dr. Hagerott question or maybe for you, Nick, but what I hear is it's been pounded into our brains so long to go get a 4-year degree that a lot of people are missing out on great opportunities at these 2-year schools. How do we do a better job of marketing that opportunity to our 9th through 12th graders?
Chris, you just mentioned it, 9th through 12th graders. We're too late.
Oh, so it needs to
We've
be like
missed the
8th
boat.
grade? Or?
You can't expect, I know the legislators were up here earlier talking about we need more welders, et cetera, and they go lean on higher ed. And higher ed says, well, you can't go talk to them as they're walking across the high school commencement stage that they should no longer go to UND or NDSU, and they should go to a 2-year or even a certificate degree program to become a welder. I recently met with a trade industry, and I don't want to pick them out because I don't think they want to be publicized. There's a lot of folks listening. And they came to me and said, Nick, we're going to go and talk to juniors and seniors. And I said, you missed the boat. I said, you need to speak to 8th graders and 7th graders and their parents. Encourage them about the job opportunities that you have. So that's the level we need to touch to change where students go, because ultimately they're humans and they make their own decisions. They pick where they want to go.
And I understand that's the focus, but then what's the marketing strategy to communicate to those students and their parents effectively to go, wow, this is a great opportunity? Because let's be honest, no parent out there wants to go, or student. I mean, I work with a lot of millennials, and a lot of them are just buried in debt. But then you talk to people that are graduating from North Dakota State College of Science, Williston, other two, and they're like, I don't have any debt. I'm making good money. Things are pretty good. So how do we effectively market to that audience?
Well, I would echo what Nick was saying. A lot of it's to the parents. I mean, parents are not sensing the massive change in the workforce. No, I mean, there was a time where the ticket to the middle class was a 4-year general degree, and then they'll pick you up to do something. Well, those days are over. So part of it is the parents understanding this, and also that we honor work. We just honor that. You are a productive member of the economy. You're helping put food on the table for your family. You're, a member of our civic community, and that's why it's important these 2-year schools also have, liberal arts gen ed base. We don't want to be just machine minders, and then later they can come back. Welcome back to a 4-year program, perhaps later, or a Bachelor of Applied Science or something.
And I get that. And if I'm missing something, please help me out. But my question is, how do we then market to people, the parents, so they see these opportunities? And I'm not hearing any distinct, like, hey, Chris, we should have Dr. Hagerott doing a statewide tour, doing parent groups at 6:30 at night, or I don't know what that is, but is there some opportunity to help these parents better understand the opportunities that are available, or?
I think, as Nick said, it's probably down in middle school and high school, starting to talk to parents there about the opportunities. And the nice thing in the United States, we have our state board members from Germany, and they put people on a track and you can't get off it. If they've cast you as this, you can't get off. It's just the wonderful thing in America is you can go back to college when you're 31 years old. My son enlisted in the Marine Corps, fought in the war, went back and got a 4-year degree at the age of 27. And that's great in America.
Somebody asked, gentlemen, what are we doing to prepare ourselves for the disruptor of distance learning? Anybody want to take that one?
In the right around 2013 or 15 session, Representative Thomas Beadle introduced a bill that I think is really one of the places we need to look at. It's called OERs, Open Education Resources. It's not like Kindles or anything like that, but it's part of a learning system. So as an example, we had $110,000 that we had available. We invested $43,000 of that based upon competitive grants. In the first year alone, we saved students and families $2 million in books because the average book 4 years ago in North Dakota per student was $1,100 cost per student. You're never going to get rid of all of it. Just not going to happen. Some of those things. But by doing that, you can say, well, I'm going to study world history. And then you click in on and you go, oh, Israeli-U.S. relationships. Click. Oh, there's Henry Kissinger talking about that. So it's really dynamic. It's a 24/7 tool that you can learn with. I think those are the kind of things that can really help. And they're quality programs. The faculty can make them what they want to for their own campuses. We're looking at K-12. So if you have a soil science class, you can say, we're going to have XYZ professor from wherever, Dickinson, put something in there on soil classifications in the Bakken and how that goes. So you can have all these bolt-ons, and then rather than have to pay another $234 for an updated book every year, they can just update these things electronically like you update your smartphone and have it just pushed out that way. And that's just one example of something, because again, there's a lot of these little tools that can help, but I mean, that would save North Dakotans, I mean, if it was take to fruition, $52 million a biennium, or a year.
It's
pardon me.
growing. Last year,
Yeah.
2 years ago, UND saved students $1.4 million on books. Last year, they saved them $4 million on books. So we are trying to become the most efficient as we can.
It's not an end-all, it's just part of it.
Got it. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Well, just one key thing about distance education is, we've got this wonderful system with 11 campuses spread across the state, and this is getting back to my neighbor here saying we should close some campuses. We don't want to be just 4 urban hubs, and people have families there, they have reasons they want to live in these places, and if we are able to provide distance education to, a mother staying at home with her children and her mother, that is a wonderful thing. And I just want to thank some of my staff here are visionaries on this. Dr. Feldner is somewhere in the audience, building a learning management system, the networks. She used to be in the governor's cabinet building the networks we have. This could absolutely transform rural America, that you can be in those small towns and be doing jobs at distance and learning at distance. And the governor's big on that. And by the way, UND was ranked in the top 20 in the entire country of online programs. So we are adapting, but we're not making everybody adapt. Some campuses want to be more residential, but they might need to move a little more in the direction of online.
Someone just mentions, if we have a different higher ed model, won't we eliminate half of the physical campuses? I know you've been a proponent of that. Representative Becker, your comments?
Well, I'll disagree slightly with how it was represented by Chancellor Hagerott. I don't want to close college campuses. I think it's inevitable, and I'm simply stating that belief. When we look, everyone can recognize that the higher ed is going to become market-based. It so completely is antithetical to being market-based right now. What you've got is a weird amalgam of funding, and you've got a separate auditing. No one knows what money's going where. We just know that, everyone loves higher ed, and so when we have a bunch of money, the legislature throws it at the university system with very little accountability. And no one, well, very little accountability that's easily able to be looked at with outcome analysis based on certain metrics, like we can with other. I mean, I've tried, and maybe there's secrets to it, but it's very difficult to understand exactly where all the money's coming from and where it's going in higher ed versus, say, any of the other agencies. But more to the point, what we're looking at is a situation where it's going to become market-based, where students are going to be able to say, okay, my older brother or my aunt went through and they ended up with a 4-year degree and it cost them X number of tens of thousands of dollars. I have an opportunity to take all my basics online at a mere few $100s a pop, and I'm going to be able to do, just like a smorgasbord, I'm going to take my organic chemistry class from UND, I'm going to take English from this online course, which is just ridiculously cheap because the market is going to push those prices lower because they can be delivered for almost zero marginal cost. And you're going to have people choosing these, and so the number of physical credit hours, the number of credit hours taken physically on a campus traditionally is going to just plummet. And then you're going to have the problem of how are we going to keep all of these 11 campuses open It doesn't make sense. We're looking at costs. We have a redundancy of administration, which is ridiculous. I wouldn't have allowed higher ed to raise tuition 1% without first dropping 30% of their administration because of the horrible bloated growth over the last several years. And so you start to look at that, you look at redundancy of programs. There's no need for us to have the great redundancy. And again, if that's what private institutions were doing, that's fine. As a legislator, my job is to make sure that the taxpayers' money is well spent. And so that's why I have to look at it through that prism. And I think regardless of whether we want to close or don't want to close, it's going to happen.
We'll give you a chance, sir. But Representative Becker, I do want to bring this up because I think most of this room would absolutely agree with you that, hey, it's your job to make sure that our tax dollars are being used effectively. When we had you on my show a while back, I said, okay, well then how would you define the return on investment on a higher education investment? And there's not a lot of clarity. So it's not to put you on the spot. I've asked that to a lot of people, and it's very tough to go, hey, Chris, if we did X, Y, and Z, that's a great ROI on higher ed.
Right. Well, first off, asking return on investment for spending taxpayers' dollars is usually the wrong way to look at it.
But then what other metric would you use
so
to say
first
this is
off,
a good use of our
what's
money?
the goal? What's the mission of higher ed? And that is to give a quality education to North Dakota students. So when we are subsidizing the out-of-state students at a rate where we're subsidizing more out-of-state students than in-state students, and only 11% of all incoming out-of-state students actually stay in state 4 years later at a cost per person staying in state of approximately $200,000, that is not money well spent.
I understand that, but we have 8,000 graduates per year at a high school, and we've got, 30,000 job openings? So how do we fill those jobs with just North Dakota kids?
Well, you can't. You have to be able to market out of state. But what I'm saying is our method right now is to have subsidize all of these out-of-state students with an 11% staying at 4 years. And just so that everyone's clear, I'm talking about all comers. We know that the longitudinal studies show that it was 20.8% at 4 years for graduates. But we also know that only 55% of students graduate with a 4-year degree in 6 years.
Right.
That leaves 11% that stay in state at a tremendous cost. So if you are going to say, well, this is really wise spending, at $200,000 per person that stays in the state for 4 years, I suggest, let's just go full out, pedal to the metal. Let's offer anyone in the United States $50,000 a year for 4 years to move to North
So I
Dakota.
hear you saying get rid of the waiver program, but I'm still not hearing,
No, that's
okay,
not
Chris,
waiver. That's out of state. Waiver is even
I'm
beyond
sorry,
that.
the
That's
out-of-state-
out-of-state reciprocity tuition.
So get rid of that, but then how would you define, yes, Chris, this is a good investment?
Well, if our students are able to get the type of degree that they need for a well-paying job, so that they're not getting a 4-year degree and then being a barista, no slam on barista, I don't know why I keep using that, but if they're using the degree for which they were educated, then that is success. The aspect of being able to bring people in out of state is something that North Dakota has always dealt with, always will, being in the cold north. That's just a fact of life. And so then you address that. Industry addresses it. It's not government's job to address it. The reason we had a huge influx of people into North Dakota was because of high-paying jobs, ridiculous paying jobs with McDonald's at $18 an hour, and anyone worth their salt making over 6 figures in their first year. That money was available. The money drew them. Rather than having government try and subsidize people to come in state and having it funded that way, because it's always funded one way or another, something is funding it. And rather than having it be through the taxpayer's wallet, just increase salaries and get people that way, or make a better tax climate. Government can do that. Reduce regulation, reduce taxes, and you make businesses come here, make people come here.
I hear you, Representative, but the challenge is, as Nick did early on, you've got a lot of people out here right now that have jobs to fill, and they're still not filled. We've been talking about this for 20 years. Thank you, Mr. Orrs. So I hear what you're saying, and yet there's still this very pervasive problem that we're not fulfilling the workforce needs.
Then why are you trying to maintain what you're doing when it's not working?
So can I jump in?
I apologize, yes. Let me think about that. That's Dr. Hagerott.
Well, there's several things, and Representative Becker and I have talked several times about this because I'm with them that we are here first for the people of North Dakota. This is the North Dakota university system, and so we're in complete agreement on that. But a couple things, and then obviously the two colleagues have things to say. The first thought was there's redundancies. We don't need these redundancies. The reality is it costs a lot to live at a campus. And there is a severe shortage in the West of several key areas. Dickinson has no two-year programs, and BSC is working with Dickinson to try to help that. There's a wonderful dental hygienist program in the East. There is none in the West. We have to get those out there. So a state as big as we are, I think we're the 15th biggest state in the country, we have to have some redundancy. But as one professor, and both professor and president said, if the students aren't the same, it's not duplication, okay? Meaning if the students really can't move to Wahpeton to take the dental hygienist thing, then it's not duplication. So we're a big state, and we don't want to have everybody just moving to 4 urban areas. The second thing I'd say on out-of-state students that we couldn't offer numerous high-end STEM programs if we didn't have Minnesota students. There are not enough rural North Dakotans who actually have the computer science and the courses they need from 9th through 12th. So we talked about this. Eventually, we do want more of our young people into these high-end classes, but we need a ramp to get there. And Minnesota students are not only helping businesses, but they're also helping to offer these courses. The last thing, I defer to the businessmen on the board here. We have one, CEO here at the end. But we need a really complicated equation that captures all the externalities, what Representative Becker is saying here. Because if we would not fill these workforce shortages with Minnesota students, even at 11%, what would that do to businesses here? How many businesses would move away? What would that do to our tax base? There's really a lot of things, and I would hate to bust the China here when we don't know what the income outcomes would be. And so that's why we need to take this slow and look at this. But you're right, we don't want to serve out-of-state students at the expense of our students, but I don't know of any North Dakotans who have been, necessarily in the business community that don't want these Minnesota students to stay. And again, maybe that could be a question with the audience. But
The clear answer to that is, without Minnesota students, we can't teach a chemistry class effectively. We need them. Otherwise, we don't hit the economies of scale to host the class. Otherwise, we'd have a chemistry class with 3 kids in it.
Right, but I think that goes back to then what's the market deeming that it needs? And obviously, you're going to need chemistry, but does the market deem that? And this person brought up a great point. I was going to bring this up. I mean, Google now, I've got the stat here, 14% of new Google hires did not have a college degree. They're taking many online courses, getting their coding stuff, and Google's like, great, we'll take you. How do we adapt to that in North Dakota?
Can I answer? My
Yes, sir.
nephew works at Google. They might have dropped out junior year, but they were taking advanced calculus, programming, all sorts of things. So they can probably qualify out for their degree, but that's often bantered around. These are high-end STEM students that they're poaching. So just to clarify that
But
statistic.
I guess I'm piggybacking off Representative Becker saying, hey, it should be market-based. What are the private, are you suggesting that private industry should start developing, as this person suggests, their own sort of online training program and maybe get rid of college altogether and they can go through that program and go work for that company, or?
Well, we are moving towards certificates. You're onto that. Whoever asked the question, you're exactly right. Specialized certificates that focus on, we need these skills, that we're moving very rapidly in that. In fact, we have a Lumina grant to study certificates, to get business people what they need, and then we can provide the gen eds and the liberal arts to lay out that foundation. But no, it's important that the companies get what they need.
Let me ask you this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I got to jump in with like 4 points. First of all, if you want to be brutal about this and think of kids only as widgets, it's actually less expensive to bring in an out-of-state student with dramatically lower retention rate than to have a son or daughter, as brutal as that sounds, go through K-12 and then spend whatever, they're going for a 2-year or a 4-year degree in the state. I ran the numbers, and Shively's, if he's still here, correct me if I'm wrong, shout it out, but we're at about $11,400 per student in K-12. You take that times,
Yeah, but you're
13
looking-
years,
you're
that's
looking-
$140,000, but that's $291,000. So if you're just looking at this as a cost-benefit ratio.
No, Senator Flacco.
But I hear that.
Let me share some with you, because this is what I think Representative Becker's saying, and this is where I think many people are trying to understand, what are we doing with this? Because if you look at the stats, and thank God, whoever did this, if you haven't seen it, it's an outstanding longitudinal study that came out of North Dakota higher ed system. Here's the reality. 7 years after graduation, only 18% of out-of-state students stick around past 7 years, while 62% of North Dakota high school students stick around 7 years or more. My point is that, okay, maybe we put $250,000 into the student, but if they're here indefinitely, the return on investment for that lifelong tax revenue, that's a great investment to me.
But they may have paid up to 7 years. And to be honest, with all due respect to the study, I think that's kind of junk. 7 years? I mean, at what point does higher ed no longer become responsible for the market? So last week or 10 days ago, it used to be Navtech, now it's another name of the company. They laid off 100 people. Is that higher ed's fault because now those people are without jobs and they may move down to the cities, they may move to Duluth, other places? 7 years ago, Earl Pomeroy was still our U.S. congressman. 7 years ago, Carson Wentz was deciding what classes am I going to take this fall in the senior year at Bismarck School. 7 years is way too long for higher ed to continue to be responsible for the things that really are out of its venue.
It's only
because
20.8% at 4 years. And the reason it's important is because everyone who's a proponent of higher ed being economic development was citing 40, 45, 45+% retention. And that's the reason the study is important, because it showed as a good study, as a valid study, that it was only 20.8 at 4 years, 18% at 7 years.
But the other piece is when we talk about good or bad data, and that's debatable, but like iPads, as an example, if I have a student who comes from Moorhead High, goes to school at Wahpeton or NDSU, stays and lives at home, but works at Microsoft, they're considered a failure under what you're talking about. And yet they spend the majority of their money probably in Fargo or Wahpeton or Market.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting, sir. What I'm suggesting is that if we're gonna bring in somebody from Minnesota, for example, and we're gonna subsidize that young person's education, and they leave our state 2 years, 4 years after we've subsidized them, where's the return on investment for that? That's what I'm suggesting. Or if you're a North Dakota-born student, and it shows me that 62% of you are going to stay here past 7 years, that's like a residual income. I mean, farmers here get that. That's like an annuity every year. I've got a tax revenue, right?
But Chris, my point too is we send kids that we've spent 13 years worth of money at $11,400 a year, give or take, it changes over time, already in them by the time they're done with high school. And if they go to the University of Minnesota, chances of coming back are dramatically lower. You look at some of the people who came from out of state and stayed, Judge Ronald Davies, UND, Reg Morelli, Hacker, Jim Roars is here, I see, Elias, which I can never get that name. 92% of U.S. Durham in North Dakota is a product of what he did. So,
Senator,
these people are doing phenomenal things.
I agree
and
with
to throw
you.
the baby out with the bathwater.
I don't
is
want
just
to
wrong.
minimize those anecdotes, and that's where I always have challenges when I talk to the leaders in our state, is I don't have clarity on what metrics are we trying to hit? What's our return on investment? What is that target? And right here, I've got it in black and white, at least some numbers that I can base some decisions off of, where I get the anecdotes. And God bless the people that come here and do great things. But let me ask you this, and I think a couple years ago, Kirsten Baszler had a quote in the paper where she said, one of the challenges that we see in K through 12 is we have what's called an honesty gap. It's a challenge to have a real honest conversation about education in our state. And I bring this up in the context where Senator Flackel, not to put you on the spot again, but when I asked for your opening vision, you said, hey, look, we've got one of the best higher ed systems in the country. My question to you is, based on what metrics?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I mean,
No, because you're the one who made the statement, and that's right. I feel like we as North
So as
Dakotans
an
tell
example,
ourselves
Chris,
that.
I mean, and I'll keep answering. I mean, the same answer has been for part of it that people keep complaining about, but the Delta Cost Project for the past longer than I can remember, probably have to ask Martin, said he's been here longer than most people and remembers everything, but has listed us in the top 4 continuously in terms of efficiency of delivering product. When you look at our numbers as far as first-time testing, whether they're there for MBAs or nursing programs or whatever, and nursing programs, by the way, I think some of them at least have 85% plus retention rate in the state. So when we can align things. But those are examples of where we are deemed, some of the best in the United States. Where we need help, I mean, we send a lot of our kids to college, but we do get too much slippage early on. And we need to do a better job of having that. It's not a pipeline in education, but it's a circle between higher ed and K-12 to continue to have those discussions.
What's slippage mean? What is that?
Oh, slippage means they start, it's not a good fit for them, that maybe they go to another school or maybe they drop out.
You led me to my next question.
But that's a flaw.
Dr. Hager, unless you want to follow up on what you were going to say, and I've got.
And I appreciate the hard questions because, as you heard the governor say.
And I don't want to, I hate to interrupt you, but I don't want to frame it as a hard question. I just want us, as this gentleman said to me, this is such an important conversation.
Yeah,
Let's have an honest conversation about, rather than pat ourselves on the back, and maybe it's not the best system in the country. Maybe we can do better.
Well, I can tell you that I was just at a National Chancellors Conference, and several chancellors said they'd trade places with me because they have systems that are just imploding. I mean, the racial relations are just tragic. They can't even teach. Evergreen College in Washington State, they want a college day where no white men can be on campus. Just catastrophic stuff. Their enrollment's plummeting. So we have a wonderful state, hardworking parents. We are only behind, I think, Minnesota, Massachusetts in the propensity of young people to want to go to college, but the questions are right. A lot of the parents don't know what they should be studying, and that's part of the responsibility of the colleges to work with business to find this out. But I would say we have to do better on graduation rates. We are too low, okay? And so there are things, and we have to do better on research. We've got a head start on some big fields, but every system around the country is now realizing autonomous systems are a growth industry, so we can't rest on our laurels. So we need to do better, but we're doing well in lots of ways.
So let me ask you this, and this is for all you guys. We're saying that, hey, Chris, we need to educate the parents better about these two-year degree opportunities, but I'm a big believer on, I can't control other people, but I can be responsible for my own actions. So my question is the context of, how are we being responsible for potentially not being completely forthright with parents about opportunities? Here's what I mean specifically. This is thank you to Don Morton. I think you're in the room, Mr. Morton. So he gave me this data recently, and this shocked me. I mean, I'm from North Dakota, and I was like, holy mackerels. So I'm going to give you some numbers here, so bear with me. I'll do the best I can without any graphics. But University of Michigan right now, they admit 32% of the kids that apply to that school. Their graduation rate is 76%. 32 they accept, 76 they graduate. If you're a parent in North Dakota or Minnesota, and it's been beaten into your head that, hey, you have to get a 4-year degree, listen to NDSU and UND. NDSU right now, we accept 83% of the people that apply, and the 4-year graduation rate is 24%. UND, 86% of the people that apply we accept, 23% graduate. So my question is where are we, meaning higher ed people, responsible and going, yeah, we've oversold the 4-year degree, because basically, if you can fog a mirror and cash a check, we'll accept you.
Chris, you're making a great point.
Right?
You're making an absolute great point.
So I think we need to say, hey, UND and NDSU, you guys need to raise your standards. And that way, then maybe parents go, you know what, you didn't have the right ACT score, maybe you should go to a 2-year school.
At some institutions, Chris, that's already in place. It's already started. UND has increased their admission standards. It's one of the first ones to do it. They raised their ACT scores. That stuff takes a little time to work through the pipeline. But we're with you. We're paying attention, and we want to make sure that we're filling non-4-year degree jobs.
So would they raise the ACT score too?
I think they're at 23.
From what, 20 to 23? Or?
Yeah.
So what does that mean as far as now? Are they going to accept 80% rather than 86? Or?
I can't correlate the number for you.
If I could comment, you have a rural population that does not offer many of the STEM classes that we need to get. And I know Ms. Baszler is working on this. They've got the distance education with Alan Peterson. Microsoft is coming to invest in North Dakota to help close that rural STEM gap. This is across many rural states. This is not just us. So that would put that in context, that a lot of rural states are struggling with exactly this problem of having rural families be able to move into research universities. And these numbers, we aren't happy with those numbers. And we're studying. We now have a new thing called predictive analytics, Conference of the Legislature that helped fund this or funded this, and that is to find out why we're losing these people. Because everyone we lose, they think, I'm not college material. So nobody's happy. Don Morton's not happy. Member Hacker's not happy. And we're working on that. But it's going to take some time. You don't want to put shock therapy, in 1 year.
And I appreciate that. And Dr. Harger, I'm not saying that you said that we're losing people. And we're not. What I'm suggesting is, maybe we need to do a better job on the upfront part of the system, because the piece that I didn't add to this, so we're accepting 83 and 86% of these students that apply. The key caveat that I didn't mention as well is you've got 25% of North Dakota high school graduates that go to our universities that need remedial courses just to get caught up. And we're letting them into our universities and saying, hey, your check cash, awesome, we'll take your money, good luck. Oh, you didn't make it? Too bad. That doesn't feel, I have a challenge with that. Like,
Well, and the other thing, Governor Dalrymple was a champion behind this, and I think there's also one of his former staff was here. We now have a funding formula that only funds if you complete successfully credit hours. So these things are all going in place. But again, I've had some rural families, say, I really want my son or daughter to go here. I know they're kind of lagging. Thank you for working with them on these remedial classes and whatnot, because we don't want to throw people away just because they've got caught in this shifting time where rural education, a rural country school isn't quite preparing them for what they need in research universities. So we're working on that, and we're not
but
happy.
so is it fair, though, to then take that parent's money and accept that student knowing they're not probably going to make it the 4 full years? Or is it, hey, you know what, everyone's got a shot, and we're going to give you a fair opportunity? I mean, I'm not saying it was right or wrong, because I don't want to deny anyone an opportunity to do what they want to do. It just feels sort of, are we being as upfront as we possibly can, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, we're finding rural students are really flourishing in the Valley City, Mayville, record enrollment. So maybe they're beginning to find the way that a good transition is to go to one of these. And Mayville, by the way, if you look at their statistics, are very low in the IPEDS data, but that's because their students are transferring to UND once they get their feet on the ground. So the system is working with this. The community colleges are wonderful, both to get the 2-year degree, but also to move on to the 4-year degrees. And so, these are, and with these numbers we all discuss. So back to your point about honesty, we are brutally honest about our own numbers. We're talking about this. We've set goals for the presidents on improving retention, attainment, and we haven't got into some of the minority communities we have in our state that are also a challenge that we need to help bring their numbers up. So.
And Senator Flackwell, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were the chairman of the Education and Finance Committee. So, I mean, is there something, I don't want to get too far out in the weeds here, but something in the K through 12 that we could be doing more effectively so that we don't have 25% of our students needing remedial courses?
Yes, and that was one of the points I tried to write down here. No one could cheat off I can't write very well, left-handed. But I think one of the things we need to look at is kind of that canary in the mine wherein, you can have in K-12 a student take Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, Algebra 2 as a sophomore, and then they're done. They don't have any kind of math experience sophomore, junior, senior year. And then we throw them into college. I think we need to get a better handle on, are they ready for that? Because that's like telling Michael Phelps, don't swim for 3 years before the Olympics, and then go for it, buddy. So what we need is some kind of a way to measure that and say, we're going to give you a math experience your senior year. Kind of like whether it's a short course or something to get you brushed up and ready to rock and roll. Because some of this is just being reminded, oh yeah, I remember that now, and brushing up. And I think that's one of the things that we need to look at in K-12. You asked earlier about the ACT test score. Statistically, if you get a 23, you have about a 70 to 74% chance of getting a C or higher in college. Some of that depends upon how much beer they drink and those kind of things, I guess. But we have people that we had one person who got a 35 ACT test score and flunked out after their first term.
No, and I trust
personal
me,
choices weigh into these too.
Let me ask you guys this. I think this person brings up a great point. Is there a way, and maybe Representative Becker, you want to take this because you've talked about different ways to do the Minnesota and North Dakota situation. Could it possibly be more effective to say, hey, come here, pay full tuition, stick around for a few years, and then we'll reimburse you rather than subsidizing the loans up front?
No, I'd be adamantly opposed to that. I think the whole concept of whether they're out of state, in state, the idea that we are going to pay for your education to try and entice you to take a certain major for which industry is short and are looking for people, that's not the right approach. Again, if you need an engineer.
But if I'm from the inner city, and I can't rub 2 nickels together, and yet I want my son or daughter to go to college, how am I going to do that without any help from somebody or government or something? How do I go about doing that?
Well,
And I ask that in the question because you and I both know, hey, look, if you're in poverty today with your family and you don't get out of it, that's a 2-generational situation that's going to be...
It's like everything that government has its hands in too much. It actually hurts the people that we claim we're worried about the most. The fact that we are doing all of these various subsidies, these programs, these scholarships, that we are in essence subsidizing the whole cost of education for anyone willing is actually jacking up the price. The cost of higher education far surpassed the rate of inflation. It's on par with the cost of medical care, and yet medical care was a crisis. That, of course, the solution is apparently government single payer. But now we have education, which already is government, and it's inflated things so dramatically. You start to take all of these various things, these programs out, and the cost of education gets less and less and becomes more affordable. The interesting thing is all of this is generally a moot point, because all of these things that we're talking about and wringing our hands about, my 6-year-old grandson, I'm not worried about it at all, because he's going to be able to get a 4-year or the equivalent, the certificate, whatever we're going to call it in 10 years, so cheap that this whole aspect of, gee, are we locking out lower income kids is going to be something that we don't need to worry about, because the market, technological advances, all this innovative disruption, creative destruction is completely going to wipe everything clean. It's going to be so inexpensive.
I can see you kind of like,
Harvard is residency program. Yale is residency program. There's something going on in these elite schools where they want their people to build social skills, emotional intelligence, and they want them there on the campus. The reality is Pell Grant recipients, back to your point, first generation college, veterans, they really flourish with human contact. So I would disagree. I do not think education is going to become all in the basement type of thing. We had the number 5 high school computer science student in the country out of Grand Forks. He was there for a panel that Ms. Baszler was holding, and we said, well, you could just teach yourself online. You took the MIT course. He goes, I love building relationships with my classmates and my teachers. I want to have in person. So I think you're right. A lot is going to change, and for adult learners, that single mother, she needs to take these classes in her basement perhaps. Adult learners coming back. But for many, many people, it's crucial. I think they have that full, holistic experience. Well, I can just ask you, did you enjoy college?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also enjoyed my online courses, and I learned much more rapidly and efficiently.
That's hybrid, but I'm just saying the idea that the physical campuses, I assume you're saying the physical campuses could go away. I was just trying to build on, you're saying it's going to
No,
destroy
they can't
everything.
go away, but the number of butts in the seats is going to decrease so much that the number of classrooms, you can never take it entirely away. I don't think I gave organic chemistry
Okay, I
lab as an
misunderstood. I
example.
apologize.
But
For the record, I apologize. I misunderstood his statement.
But here,
so.
what I want you to do, Chris, is put in a time capsule for 10 years this little last 3 minutes of the idea of who's going to be taking online, whether it's the single mom at home, or whether, as Chancellor Hagerott is suggesting, or whether it's entirely the entire educational student body, like I'm suggesting, and let's replay that in 10 years, because it's coming. It's a done deal in my mind.
Can I put my thoughts in the time capsule? I'll throw my thoughts in. And what we're seeing, and the University of North Dakota is a very good example, is it's a mix. It's not a one path or the other. It's a mix. And then it's not only just a mix of online and in person, but it's also a mix of how we integrate with industry in a different way. And we don't need to be everything to everybody. I'll pick on a couple of industries real briefly. Number one, we don't have a dental school in the state of North Dakota. Yet we have a partnership with the University of Minnesota to send students to the University of Minnesota. Then we provide a loan forgiveness program when they come back and they establish themselves here in North Dakota. What resulted? In the nation, we were the highest number of new dentists to start a practice in the state of North Dakota as a result of that combination. I don't know about you guys, but when I call the dentist, it takes me like 3 months to get an appointment. Right? So we obviously have a shortage of dentists. Let's just kind of stay on that, pay my bill. Sure. And just to caveat on that, it's been mentioned about high workforce needs, and there's some questions down here about welders, et cetera. One of the highest areas of need is certified dental assistants today. And the western portion of the states has provided a solution. It's a high-cost program. It requires lots of lab space and equipment to teach a certified dental assistant. The dentists in western North Dakota have said, let us be the lab. Let us use our equipment. You do what you do best, which is delivering instructional value. And so that's where the time capsule comes in. We will continue to be the experts at instructional information and teaching. And that's where we need to spend our time. And if that means that we have campuses that need to be retooled, we should retool them. University of North Dakota is retooling as we speak, right? Tough budget times, they're actually taking money right now and putting it into deferred maintenance in a set-aside pool. The old adage used to be you went to the legislature and asked for a check, right? So they're transforming. They're also raising 8 buildings, not demolishing 8 buildings. So they're creating a campus for the future that's efficient, and they're providing that dual kind of mixed online, in-person kind of education. Because the reality is, Chris, lots of people go to college for an experience.
Amen. Gentlemen, for sake of time, we've got 6 minutes left, so I do want to give you each a final word. You've been seeing a lot of the questions come up here. If there's something that I missed and you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish we would have got to that one, if you want to address that or whatever, but we'll give you each roughly 60 seconds. Dr. Hagerott, you're first, sir.
Yeah, just to clarify one thing on costs, the 4-year schools are below the regional average. Our 2-year schools are actually above the regional average, but they're among the highest ranked. So we've got a wonderful 2-year system that is adapting. And I would just say that part of our philosophy is we're a big state, and each campus has to understand its local needs, but there's some things that are statewide, system-wide, like learning management system, analytics, shared degree programs, and emerging technology programs. But we want the campuses to respond to local needs, respond to industry, but we're all part of a system that serves the people of North Dakota, and I see that as a crucial point to make.
Thank you.
I'll just clarify a couple of things that I've been sort of discussing over these last several months, and one is this aspect of campus closures. Again, I'm not advocating for it. I'm simply suggesting that it is going to be a necessity. And absolutely, it's going to be a tremendous misfortune to the community in which the college campus resides. But what I'm suggesting is that if we talk about it and have an honest discussion now, we can look at ways to possibly mitigate that harm. These are structures that are currently not having any property tax garnered for the community. I mean, that to me sounds like an opportunity to bring in industry. There are ways to handle this. The other thing is when we're talking about out-of-state students, I'm not anti-out-of-state students. I'm suggesting, I agree with Chancellor Hagerott and Nick when he talked about how we need students from out-of-state to fulfill some of our classes. Now, if we consolidate the classes that need lessons, but what I'm suggesting, if we have a ratio of out-of-state, subsidized out-of-state students to in-state students of about 1.5 to 1, that's enough. That's plenty to keep these courses going. We don't need the current 3 to 1 and growing that we have, which again is a burden to our taxpayers. We have to understand and at least agree on the truth that North Dakota taxpayers are paying for, in the case of Minnesota, 40% of the cost of college education, minus, and I'd love to get into the memorandum of understanding, 40% of the cost after you subtract plant improvements. 40%, that's huge. We just at least acknowledge that the taxpayers are paying for that. If you want North Dakotans to pay for Minnesota students, okay, but let's say that that's what it is.
Thank you, sir. Senator Flacco, last word.
Yeah, just quickly, there's a lot of great work being done with the preparedness in K-12, leveraging the senior year with AP preparatory courses, and also getting people up and rocking and rolling for remediation. Online has a great place for it. But again, when you look at, when I come into town, the building names I see, whether it's Shields or Sanford or whatever, those are out of state. So there is a lot of value. I don't think Ralph Engelstad would have gave $20 million if he was taking all his courses online. I think the college experience is unlike any other, and because of that, you gain loyalty to your campus. And with, kind of tight budgets in the state, we are relying more and more on those philanthropic people, regardless of their zip code. Again, for the people that are employing people out there, the millennials, and you probably know this, I'm sure, but they're unlike I was, or older, or whatever, because they don't want just a job. They want to do something where they think they're creating and know they're creating public value. They want to add to the quality of place and quality of life. So it's unlike any other in the past. Data, iPads, again, it doesn't count if you transfer from UND to NDSU. UND gets nicked on it, and you can never make that up. So again, caution with the data. Because as an example, I got the numbers on the way here. NDSU had 2,844 first-time freshmen this last fall, and they graduated 2,300 of those, so 82%. Well, that's not an accurate graduation rate either, because you have transfers coming in and out. So I think that's what's really, again, important, is to get better data that reflects what we want to reflect. We have a lot of campuses on the valley next to Minnesota. You know, you have to look at the whole market system. And, you know, philosophically, it's really changed. Higher education isn't just more about stuffing information into people. It's about opening people's minds, because as it was said, you know, you can get so much information on your smartphone and other things. It's about producing students who are functionally intelligent, ready to go to work on day one. They're problem solvers. That's what America does. We land on the moon, we solve problems.
Thank you, Senator. Nick.
Just thanks a lot. I think this is part of it is getting the message out. And number one is to stay laser focused on student success, and to ask that industry continue to engage with higher education in the many ways that you do today, but to really realize that we are totally engaged with you. It's really interesting to know over 1,000 Bismarck-Mandan high school kids spend a part of their day, their regular school day, on the BSC campus, taking welding, taking auto tech. Higher education is here to support the needs of industry. We're asking you to come knock on our doors and help us connect with you.
Thank you to all four of you. We do want to ask you to be a part of our poll, but gentlemen, great work. Obviously a very passionate conversation, because it's so important to the future of our state. If we give them all a big round of applause, please, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. And if you'll answer this question, please, do you think North Dakota's higher education system is ready and prepared to meet our state's future workforce needs? Hopefully you can see the information there. Please take part in the poll. And again, if we can give the Chamber a big round of applause for putting on this outstanding event. I just love being up here. So thank you very much to the Chamber for having us. Yes, sir.
All right. You thought it was bad standing between you and lunch. I'm standing between you and getting to go. But we'll make this really quick. We've been here 7 hours, 15 minutes, and quite honestly, it does not seem that long at all. Everything went really well. Thank you very much for the moderators, the panelists, and Governor Doug Burgum. We had excellent discussion. They took time, and I say they put themselves under the bright light front and center, and I literally mean bright lights, because you can't see nothing up here. But that leads into media productions. Thank you. This is by far the best of all the policy summits I've been to. The audio visual here, the stuff on the sides, the stuff on the back, everything worked great. And then GNDC staff, this did not come together. There was a working team. I was a small part of that where we talked on the phone, but they did all the heavy lifting, Susan and Andy, Charisse, and it's excellent job. Everything came off. And of course, thank you all for joining us. This was our best policy summit yet, so thank you. It was a record. Drive safe, and we'll see you all next year.